understand that this is the group of the world's most creative Zionists. So what we're going to talk about a little bit is creative Zionism, which almost sounds like an oxymoron, right? Because the way that the world has normally operated, creativity and Zionism, I think, have not typically gone hand in hand in the last X period of years. So I would like to actually, I don't know, I know some of the people that you've heard from, but I don't actually know what they said. So I'm actually shooting blind here a little bit, or driving blind, which is either good or bad. But I'm going to actually just put out two major points and then open it up for discussion. But the two major points are designed to get you to think, I hope, a little bit differently than perhaps some of you may have been thinking before you got started in this latest phase of your work, about some of the challenges facing Israel and some of the, I would say, the goals that Israel ought to have for itself as a country, as a state, as a sovereign entity. So I'll put out some ideas there. Some of them are meant perhaps to be a tiny little bit provocative, which I hope will at least keep you awake and maybe get you to respond. And I'm not sure that I'm right about any of what I'm going to say, but at this moment, at 7:15, I'm kind of quasi-committed to these notions. So if you get me uncommitted to them, that's also fine. As long as we learn from each other, that's, I think, a success. So I want to talk about one issue facing the Jewish people in general, in Israel more particularly, taking place outside of Israel's borders, okay? And then one issue facing Israel inside her borders. The issue that I want to talk about outside is what I would call the gradual delegitimization of Israel, which I think is taking place. I think Israel is contributing to it very slightly, but I think it's about much bigger than what Israel is actually doing or not doing. And so I want to talk a little bit about the delegitimizing of Israel taking place outside of Israel's borders. And then I want to come back to the question of, well, really, who cares? I mean, why does it really matter if there's a Jewish state? It's nice. And a lot of kosher restaurants on Emek Rafaim and a couple of mediocre bookstores, which is as good as Israel does. But, if you go to Barnes & Noble, it can make you a non-Zionist very quickly, just because the couches and the linear feet of shelf space and all that, So really, who cares? Why do we need this place? And I want to actually try to make an argument about why we need this place. Which I'm assuming some people that you've spoken with have said something about. I probably will not disagree with what they said, but I may take it from a slightly different perspective, and we'll perhaps overlap. No idea, but you'll tell me. What's going on outside of Israel? I'll start up with something having on the surface, at least on the face of it, having nothing to do with Israel per se, or nothing to do with Zionism per se, and talk about the Shoah for a second. But this is really not a long, the Shoah happened, so therefore we need Israel argument. That argument, I think, is an extremely problematic argument in a whole multiplicity of ways, both because of the content of the argument and the ways in which we use it, and, in fact, in the ways in which the world reacts to it. Now, if it was a good argument, we really shouldn't care how the world reacts to it, but it's a problematic argument in certain ways, although the Shoah is not at all irrelevant to Zionist culture and to Zionist sensibilities, nor should it be, I think. But when I say I want to talk about the Shoah for a second, that's not the argument that I want to bring in. I want to actually get you to think for a second about any one of the number of Shoah museums that you have probably seen, or the books, if you've read good comprehensive histories of the Shoah, that you've read. But whether it's Yad Vashem here, or the museum in Washington, D.C., or any of the other ones around America and Europe, at least the ones that I know, or the good ones at least, to get you to think about what they actually show you for a second, and what you see in those museums long before you actually encounter the images that you associate with the Shoah. Right? The images that we associate with the Shoah are, the piles of shoes, and the piles of hair, and the fillings, the gold fillings, and the pictures of the showers, the alleged showers, and the pictures of, the emaciated human beings who were found by the liberating Allied forces as they came into the camps. The massacre, that's all of the imagery that we associate with the Shoah. And so when you go into one of these museums, take Yad Vashem as the most recent addition or re-edition to this panoply of examples, you kind of walk in and you expect that this is what you're going to get hit with. And in fact, of course, at the end of the day, you sort of do. But you don't get hit with it in Yad Vashem nearly as much as you would think that you would, and you certainly don't get hit with it as quickly as you thought that you would. You get hit with it well into the exhibit. And what you see in Yad Vashem, if you've been to the new one, long after you hit this little video screen on the left-hand wall as you walk in, which kind of shows Jewish life in Europe in all of its normality. Little kids practicing the violin, and families having dinner, and chit-chatting, or even squabbling a little bit over dinner, as families are wont to do. Kind of these were regular people. They weren't born to be victims in any kind of a way. They were just living lives like you and I are trying to live, and then the world turned upside down on them. But after you get that point You basically walk in for part of the exhibit, and this is the part that's relevant to us, and you see basically the gradual portrayal of the Jew in Europe prior to the first Jew being killed as other, as deviant, as problematic. And you see it in a whole variety of ways, which range from the obvious yellow badge, right? There's nothing terrible about a yellow badge. Nothing terrible about an orange ribbon, right? People here chose to wear orange ribbons. There are times that you actually choose to identify yourself. People in America wear little buttons on their lapels of Israeli flag, American flag, whatever. There's nothing terribly wrong about having to wear a badge. Now, having to wear it, of course, is a different story than choosing to wear it, obviously. But even in that, its real insidious impact, of course, was simply in making the Jew other. The laws in Nazi Germany that forbade all sorts of things, including marriage to Jews, physical contact with Jews, financial and economic interaction with Jews, etc., etc. Again, that made it much worse. But all of this was a gradual process of portraying, as they did, by the way, through editorials, as they did through caricatures, as they did through cartoons, as they did through rewriting of history of the First World War to a certain extent, as Hitler tried to do more successfully than people thought originally in Mein Kampf, to portray the Jew as other, as deviant, as problematic. Now, why is that important? It's important because it was enormously effective. In other words, when you look at these exhibits now and you see these caricatures of the Jews in German newspapers, you say, yeah, obviously this led up to what happened. But when you saw these cartoons in the German newspaper in 1932, you didn't say to yourself, this is going to lead to genocide. You just said, okay. And if you were like most of Germany, you began to buy it a little bit. It's very hard to withstand the social pressures of the gradual but relentless communication of a certain social idealization or characterization of a subgroup. And you can be as liberal as you want in America. It's very hard not to internalize certain dimensions of the way in which people perceive people of color or other subgroups. It gets to you at a certain point. You have to fight it constantly not to have it seep in. And we are in a very, very different world in 2007 than people were in 1932. People weren't quite as aware of the ways in which this worked. Why is all this important? This is important because by the time the Nazis actually started killing the Jews, in small numbers at the beginning, by the way, also a very smart way in which they did this, the idea that the Jew was different and problematic was actually widely accepted. On some sort of logical, explicit, rational level, or on some gut subconscious level, the notion that the Jew was other, the notion that the Jew in Europe was problematic, had seeped through the soil of Europe so deeply that some people to their great credit, knew that this was profoundly wrong and did something about it, but most people either participated in it or allowed it to happen. Now, why does that matter for us? Because I want to make the claim, and it's a little bit in your face, I grant you, but I actually do believe this. I want to make the claim that something insidious and parallel is actually happening about the state of Israel in the international community today.